Hey everybody, welcome back to Exploring Higher Realities. And today we are honored to have back on returning guest and Kriya Yoga teacher, my Kriya Yoga teacher, Ryan Kurczak. So welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And you've been on a few times now. I'm gonna create a playlist so everybody can see all the interviews that and talks I've done with you. And in this episode, I very much wanted to discuss something around the theme of the first book that I read of yours is continuing the lineage of enlightenment, and that's a book about Kriya Yoga and your particular lineage in the Kriya Yoga lineage. So, uh, just briefly, uh, the actually, yeah, the theme of continuing the lineage of enlightenment.
Mhm.
Um, where were you going with that title? And like the essence of what is continuing the lineage of enlightenment.
Yeah, and it's funny. I haven't really thought about that in a long time. But basically, I think it's important to remember that uh, we, as meditators and yogis, that we are essentially continuing this lineage. Very often we think about teachers like Paramahansa Yogananda, and we have an idea as though that is what this is all about, having a connection to a teacher like that. But really, the lineage is only as powerful as is the practitioners of that lineage. And so, while teachers like Paramahansa Yogananda, who are very famous, are extremely important in that lineage, and they're real powerhouses of knowledge and wisdom and energy and so on, but it is how that process moves through time. How does it reach people throughout the generations, and how does it inspire the next generations of yogis? How does it help and how does it serve those individuals who are looking for greater clarity, greater peace, and greater self-realization? So when I was considering that title, my goal was really to emphasize the fact that this whole process of enlightenment, as we call it, it's not dependent on one famous teacher. It's really important that it is a living tradition from teacher to student, and that's able to persist through time.
And yeah, something that just came up, and we're going to get to the actual gurus and the lineage. But what's something you've noticed uh, in that lineage, like from generation to generation, that maybe changes or alters? I mean, because you can have the idea of being something like a purist, where it has to be the same always, or but really, things change with time. So, what's something you've observed from generation to generation of the Kriya Yoga lineage?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a very important question because, as you mentioned, it's very easy for us as humans to lock onto something in the past and to say that's exactly how it should be and it should always stay that way forever. And the trouble with that is then we get sort of um, things become husks of what they should be. There's no more life in them. We're just kind of like drying out our wreath and sticking it on the door and saying, "Isn't that pretty?" rather than cultivating the garden so we can have more wreaths as the seasons go on. But if you really just go back to the beginning with Mahavatar Babaji and Lahiri Mahashaya at the very beginning of the tradition, what do we have there? We have a renunciate yogi who isn't very well known, wanders in the Himalayas by himself with his band of students, and he reconnects with Lahiri Mahashaya, and he allows Lahiri Mahashaya to teach Kriya Yoga to householders. So whereas before this practice, as we went through the Dark Ages, was reserved for specifically renunciate yogis, well, when Babaji met Lahiri Mahashaya, there was there was an encouraging to make this more accessible to people who are living a householder life. And so that's when Kriya Yoga, as we know it, became more accessible to all of us, those of us living in homes with mortgages, with families, and these kinds of things. And as time progressed, if you follow the lineage, well, Yogananda, and I know there's a lot of criticism for Yogananda and how he approached this, but if you really just put it into perspective, Yogananda coming from India into the United States in the 1920s, and I'm not going to go into all of that, but if you just think about how America was in the 1920s, and you think about this Indian Swami coming over and teaching about self-realization and so on, well, Yogananda made, again, this process more accessible to people who might not otherwise have had access to it. And what was beautiful about Yogananda, he was really the right person for the job because his teacher, Sri Yukteswar, was deeply interested in Christianity and was deeply interested in kind of showing how we're really working towards the same end here, the Eastern and the Western traditions. They're really going in the same direction. And Yogananda also had a deep love for Christianity. And so, as Yogananda brought this to the West, if you pay attention to how his organization functions, well, I mean, they've got Jesus right there on the altar. So there is a cross pollination of traditions, but Kriya Yoga is central. And then again, as time passed, many of Yogananda's students perpetuated that way of teaching things. And that's absolutely fine because there are plenty of people in the world who need that particular approach. But my teacher, Mr. Davis, while he deeply honored Yogananda, at one point in time he realized, we don't really need we don't really need to pepper Christianity into this yoga practice because yoga was doing great before that, and we've reached a stage in our current collective culture, I guess you could say, where there are people out there that don't need that Christianity aspect of it. And I'm one of them. I was raised Catholic, and Catholicism's fantastic. It's a beautiful thing, but it didn't really speak to me in the way that just straight up Sankhya yoga based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali did. And so Mr. Davis, he honored that aspect of Yogananda's experience, but he himself brought it a little back more towards, we're meditating, we're following these practices. You can follow any religion that you want, but we're not necessarily going to overlay a particular religious ideal or tradition on this. And so this happened at the right time, when it was possible, when we've gone through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, we got into the 2000s and so on, and we didn't need that so much anymore. Or I guess we should say other people didn't need that so much anymore. And then when we get into the 2000s, when the internet became very popular, well, now we can reach people in very great numbers, and people can find information. I know when you were on retreat with me, I mentioned this, even just way back at the end of the 90s. Well, when I met Mr. Davis and I was interacting with him, I didn't have the internet to go watch hundreds of hours of videos on Kriya Yoga. I had Autobiography of a Yogi. I had 2 of Roy's books. And in order for me to learn, I had to actually go on retreat with Mr. Davis and listen to him talk and hope I remembered what he said, and then come back and study the 2 books of his that I had for another year until I went back again. And now, as we've moved into this age of the internet, you can take a whole course on Kriya Yoga without ever leaving home. You can learn the philosophy, you can learn the principles, you can even begin to engage the process. And so I know that might have been a little more than what you were looking for, but if you just kind of follow this experience, you'll see that it does shift and change through the ages. Now, I want to be very clear that the essentials of the practice don't shift and change. So those remain the same. But in a way, we have to have this lineage, we have to have this movement of teacher to student through time so that the spiritual path can remain relevant to the culture that needs it. Now, again, in no way am I saying that we're altering or changing the fundamentals of the actual process. Adding Jesus into the mix, no big deal. You still do your Kriyas, you've just got Jesus in the mix somewhere. Yeah. But it's not altering the fundamentals of the process. So as it moves through time, the fundamentals remain the same. And even across all of the other branches of the tradition, As you know, there are plenty of branches that say, I have the one right true way. And it's because it's from this person way back in the 1800s, and that's the way it should be. But they're staying steady with the essentials too. And if they need to say that their way is the one right true way, we'll let them, because that's going to help their own faith. That's going to help their own capacity to be successful on their own path, and everybody's fine.
Yeah. And so for this particular lineage of Kriya Yoga, it goes, Mahavatar Babaji, Lahiri Messiah, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, Roy Eugene Davis, and then now you. Uh,
Yeah.
so for people watching, listen, can you give a brief breakdown of maybe Mahavatar Babaji? Who was this mysterious yogi who
Yeah.
brought the Kriya in the, was it 19th, 20th century, right? 19th or no? Yeah, going
The
back, right?
1860s was
Yeah,
when those two met, Lahiri Mahasaya and Mahavatar Babaji. Well, there's a lot of, well, there's not a lot really about Mahavatar Babaji, but there's a lot of myth. There's a lot of fun
right.
stuff about Mahavatar Babaji. He's immortal. He is an avatar of the divine. And you can go with those however you want, but he was a wandering yogi in the Himalayas, and not a lot is known about him. Like, for example, in one of my books, I have a picture of Haranikan Baba, which is, some people think that might be who Mahavatar Babaji was, and so on. But anyway, there's not a lot known about him. He was a wandering yogi who is said to be immortal. And that's okay, because really the whole purpose of yoga is to recognize our own immortality. So whether he's physically immortal or whether he just recognizes the immortality of his spirit, it's fine. And a quick story about that. One time I was leading a retreat, and someone came up to me on the second day of the retreat, and they asked me, do you believe Mahavatar Babaji is still alive? And I think I said no, or I said I didn't know, but I was kind of leaning towards, that's just kind of a neat myth that we have within this tradition, and it can be helpful for those who need it. But I was in the negative about it. And the funny thing is when I said it, I didn't feel right about it. And one of the things about yoga, one of the essential practices is practicing satya, or truth, as best you can. We're not all perfect, but we can do our best with it. And as I've focused myself on practicing satya, what I've realized is sometimes when you say something, even if you don't have all the information, if it's not true, there's a feeling in there, and it kind of bugs you a little bit. And so after I kind of affirmed the negative, when he came back, or when we came back the next day, I wanted to tell him what my sense was, that I thought maybe I wasn't telling the truth there. I don't know, but maybe I wasn't. And sadly, he didn't show up to the third day
Oh,
because
no.
I don't think he liked that response. But anyway, so Mahavatar Babji is essentially a mystery, but what he represents within the tradition is this very clear self-realized aspect of ourself. In a way, again, we've mentioned Christianity already during this particular discussion, whereas Jesus, was he a real person? Well, probably, but what's more important is what he represents. And what he represents is the Christ consciousness, which is a being of light, which knows what's going on. So I'm going to say that Mahavatar Babaji, in a way, plays that role in the Kriya Yoga tradition. And then following that is Lahiri Mahashaya. And these two met in the 1860s. And Lahiri Mahashaya was a clerk, and he had a family. He had 5 children, and he was a householder. And he would go to work every day, and he would come home, and in the evenings he would teach people Kriya Yoga, but he would do it quietly. He would do it silently, in the sense of, if people came to him, he would say, don't tell anyone that you're practicing Kriya Yoga, and don't tell anyone I'm your guru. And that's because he wanted them to actually just practice, not to talk about it, not to create a spiritual personality for themselves, but to go home and in silence, in their own private quarters, develop this relationship with the divine, develop this relationship with a sense of inner peace and clarity. And in the course of his life, I believe it was estimated that he initiated over 5,000 people into Kriya Yoga. And again, this is back in the late 1800s. the early 1900s. And that's a pretty big reach when there's no internet and there's no postal service like we, have known it and so on. But he had a student, Swami Shrikteshwar, and Swami Shrikteshwar was considered to be very stern and very austere. Right there, I have an icon.
Yeah.
One of my students who's an iconic. They make icons,
Yeah.
whatever you call them. She makes icons for the church, and so she made this for me, which became the cover of the book, Understanding the Holy Science. And I really appreciate that icon. But Shrikteshwar was a very stern yogi, very serious, very austere. He was considered a jnana yogi, very much interested in being rational and reasonable and so on. And Yogananda had said that he could have been one of the most popular and effective gurus if he wasn't so hard on his students, because he expected a lot. He expected a lot of his students, and he wasn't fooling around really. But he was a student of Lahiri Mahashaya, and Shrikteshwar had been married and he had a daughter. But after his wife passed away, then he became a Swami, and his family had several properties. And so he would manage these properties, and he would use the income from the properties to take care of the ashram, essentially. So he was not dependent on money from others to be able to do what he was doing. And he found that to be very important, because then it's when you're dependent on others, it can be very easy to get caught up in changing the way you do things to make sure people are supporting you. And so he was very much about being independent, but he was very austere, and he was the teacher of Paramahansa Yogananda. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda, he was a very emotional, a very devotional, a very active youth, and very passionate about yoga from a very young age. He was always trying to run away to visit sages in the Himalayas and the mountains. He was looking for any kind of sadhu that he could find, any kind of yogi he could find. So in the book Autobiography of a Yogi, which is how most of us come to Kriya Yoga, he's talking about many of the saints and the sages that he had met. And what was interesting about him was he kept trying to run away to the mountains to meet his teacher, and he didn't want to go to college, and he just wanted to renounce the world. And he ended up meeting his teacher very near where his family lived. And when he met his teacher, Sri Yukteswar, there was this exchange where Sri Yukteswar says, I will give you my unconditional love. Will you give me the same? And Yogananda affirms, yes. And then Sri Yukteswar says, well, will you do as I say? And he says, I want you to go home, and I want you to go back to college. The exact thing that Paramahansa Yogananda did not want to do. But that's an example of Sri Yukteswar and how he worked. His goal wasn't to make people feel great about themselves, although in the end, of course, once you realize the importance of yoga, you do feel great about yourself, what you really are. But his goal was to root out all of the attachments and the aversions, because in the practice of yoga, sure, Kriya Yoga, you circulate life force through the spine, you meditate on inner light, you have beautiful mystical studies that you engage in. But the real work and the real practice is developing yourself psychologically and overcoming your attachments and your aversions. And so here we had Sri Yukteswar, the Jnana yogi, who was very rational and very austere and very disciplined, meeting Yogananda, who was very impetuous and devotional. And Yogananda needed that to balance out his personality. And it's fascinating because once Yogananda came to the United States, he created Self-Realization Fellowship, which many people are aware of. And Mr. Davis, who is also a very disciplined, a very austere, a very quiet teacher and person, he ends up having a teacher who was like Yogananda. So it's neat to see how, in a way, the tradition balances itself out as the teachers and the students interact with each other. And then Mr. Davis, he met Yogananda when he was 18 years old. He left his farm in Ohio, and he was inspired. He knew that Yogananda was his teacher, and he met him, I believe it was Christmas Eve of 1949. and he was accepted into self-realization fellowship, became a monk, and a few years later he was ordained and authorized by Paramahansa Yogananda to teach Kriya Yoga. um, and after that, Mr. Davis dedicated his entire life to the process. He passed away in his late 80s. He met Yogananda when he was 18, and his whole life was dedicated to writing books on Kriya Yoga, traveling from city to city. Again, he was doing most of his work before the internet, which means that he had to print his books, take them to all of these different cities, and he would do that year after year after year. So Mr. Davis was quite an example of dedication to the path with his own practice, but also dedication to making sure that the information was available and accessible to all the people that were sincerely interested.
Yeah, and that leaves us with you, Ryan. How did you get involved in Kriya Yoga, and how did you meet Roy?
Yeah, yeah. I I became interested in Kriya Yoga. Uh, it's a good question. Um, I really didn't know a whole lot about yoga, to be honest with you. I was as a child and as a teenager and even into college, I was interested in the occult. I was interested in alternative ways of knowing. I was interested in different kinds of philosophies, but I didn't really explore a lot of Eastern philosophy. And it wasn't until I was around 18 or 19, and 19 when I was introduced to Autobiography of a Yogi by a yoga teacher in my hometown, one of two, and probably one of only two vegetarians in my hometown. And once I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I assumed, well, since this is a yoga teacher, then she can tell me how to practice Kriya Yoga. And she said, no, that's not how it works. She said, you either have to go to Self Realization Fellowship in California, or we have been initiated by a student of Yogananda's, Roy Jean Davis in Georgia. And I was just practical. I had never traveled more than probably 3 hours from home up until that point. And so I thought, well, I'm not flying to California because I don't have any money. I'm just not even out of college yet. And so I called Center for Spiritual Awareness and I arranged to attend a retreat in August of 2000. And I really didn't know what to expect other than, these miraculous stories that I'd read in Autobiography of a Yogi. But I arrived at Center for Spiritual Awareness and I met Mr. Davis. And again, I wasn't looking for a tradition or a teacher. I was just looking for the answers to my philosophical and spiritual questions. I didn't have any kind of previous knowledge or belief or understanding in Eastern traditions or guru lineages and so on. It just wasn't my thing. I was raised Catholic in the middle of West Virginia, and I didn't know a lot about that. But when I first met Mr. Davis, it was during that retreat that I was sitting in meditation, and he walked in, and he lit the candles in front of the pictures of the lineage of gurus, and I just started crying. I felt like I had come home. I didn't know what was going on. Why am I having this response to this silhouette of a man lighting a candle and waving it in front of these pictures of the gurus? And I just knew that this is where I was meant to be, and that's as far as I had gotten with it. And so throughout the week, I attended the retreat. I listened to Mr. Davis talk, and the more he talked, the more I felt like I really understood what he was saying. It just made sense, and I realized that the practices that he is teaching, I'm just going to this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And from that point forward, that was it. I just knew that's what I was supposed to be doing. And then I would, as the years went on, the first couple of years, I would go visit the retreat center maybe twice a year, and then 4 times a year. And then after about 8 years, we actually moved about 2 hours away, and then I was visiting, every month, and that went on for about 18 years. And yeah, that's how I became involved in the process. And I was authorized to teach about 5 years after I was first initiated. So, and since then, I've been doing my best to represent the tradition however I can.
Yeah, and with Roy, he's so s- he makes everything sound so just simple and direct, right?
Yeah,
Matter of fact. And for people watching, listening, he wrote a book about his experiences or with Paramahansa Yogananda, called, was it Paramahansa Yogananda as I Knew Him?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean that's a great book. Um,
Mhm.
and it demonstrates, again, it shows his journey, but also how he came into the lineage and what that was like for him, which was a very interesting story. How he went out to live on that farm, and
Right.
but with all those things considered, and this idea of continuing the lineage of enlightenment, I'm trying to best phrase this. Um, hmm. What is, and I know you have like a course on this, so it's a lot. You can summarize the we have the gurus and the representatives of the Kriya Yoga lineage, and of course the students and others who become teachers. So, what is, I guess you can say, like the ideal relationship, and even, let's say, the purpose of the guru and the student and that dynamic.
Yeah. It's a very good question. And it's a hard one to answer without sounding weird.
Yeah.
And the reason that's the case is simply because, in our just in the world, since humans have been around, there have been people who've taken advantage of other people.
Yeah.
And particularly when an individual is seeking something like spiritual well-being or clarity, or maybe they're struggling and so they're seeking out spirituality. um, there's all kinds of room for difficulties to arise there. And so, how to answer this question? What I would say is, in order for there to be a good, helpful, supportive relationship, there has to be a few variables. I was going to say two, but there might be more. The first variable is that both the teacher and the student have to want the same thing. Meaning, for example, Mr. Davis was inspired to be with Yogananda and to learn Kriya Yoga because for him, he wanted he wanted to wake up spiritually. He wanted to be as clear as possible, as awake as possible. And Yogananda wanted that as well. And Sri Yukteswar wanted that as well. As individuals, they themselves, their direction, their goal, their inspiration was to be as awake and clear as possible. They didn't want to be well known. They weren't seeking out fame and fortune. Their drive was awakening. And Lahiri Mahashaya exactly the same. Their drive was awakening. And so the student also has to want that same thing. And the reason I'm specifying this is because sometimes we get involved in spiritual traditions or relationships because maybe we are psychologically hurt, or we've had issues with our parents, or we don't feel well in the world. And so in that case, we're not seeking out spirituality to be awake. We're seeking it to escape from problems. And sometimes people seek out spirituality to find another route to feed their ego, because you can build a spiritual ego around yourself. See how good I am. See how spiritual I am. See how much the guru loves me. And and these are very subtle things, and they're very hard to work through. But if a student is subtly seeking those things, it's probably not going to work real well because they're not looking for the same thing. But if you have a teacher who is set on being awake, learning as best he or she can, embodying that state of clarity and awareness, and you have a student who also absolutely loves that experience and loves that path and desires that same thing, then when those two come together, there is going to be a transmission. There is going to be a deep kind of love and friendship there, where support will amplify that motivation, that direction to being as awake and as clear as possible. And when you see this happening through the lineage, for example, I've observed this myself, especially just recently. An experience happened. A student had written to me, student who had gone through my advanced course, and he wrote to me this very specific question about a state of consciousness, and it was very specific. It wasn't just, I've had this experience of oneness, very vague and miasmic. It was very specific. And I laughed out loud when I read this question, because I remember several years ago asking that exact same question of my group. and so all I did was I went back to the email where I asked that same question. I copied and pasted, and I said, "Oh, by the way, I asked this exact same thing. Here's my question. Here's the answer. I say the same thing." And the reason, to me, it might not seem like a lot to a lot of people, but I find that to be so beautiful, because it's indicating that the path, the practices, the philosophy, the guidance are resulting in the same kinds of realizations, and very specific kinds of realizations. So one person in the lineage of a previous generation learns, grows, experiences, and then they're able to encourage the next generation. And if they're paying attention and apply those things, then they come to a state where they come up against the exact same realization. And now they're like, okay, what's this? And they can be confirmed by the previous generation, and that continues to pass on. So there has to be this moving in the same direction, and a deep love of the process, a deep faith in the process. And when all those things come together, it's amazing. Someone who's facilitating the experience feels the grace and the power of it. The person who's receiving it, because I was on the receiving end for a long time, you feel that kind of upliftment, and then you really start to tune into why the tradition, the lineage, is so important. And it really is it's a beautiful thing. So that's yeah, those are the main things I think are very important for that kind of relationship to work well.
Yeah, and in regards to Roy Eugene Davis and Paramahansa Yogananda, I remember there was a quote from Paramahansa Yogananda to Roy Eugene Davis. And actually, it's the story where Roy is on the grounds with Paramahansa Yogananda, and he asked Paramahansa Yogananda, of all the I believe Paramahansa Yogananda said, if you have a question, just ask. And Roy had this question of, of all the saints and sages that you wrote about in the book Autobiography of a Yogi, how many of them became fully realized? And he just casually answered, "Oh, I think like not many, you
Mm-hmm.
know." And he goes on to explain this idea of some people going partially through the path to the point where that they become content.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a difficult question to navigate, or idea, because I guess it's understandable, right? I can see where that makes sense. And I believe Paramahansa Yogananda said, "But you must go all the way." So
Right.
can you explain the ideas behind that conversation?
I can try in 15 minutes.
Yeah.
um, well, I think you touched upon it when you mentioned the idea that they reached a point where they were content. And one of the things that Yogananda had said, that they essentially become content with communing with God. That they become content in God communion. And we don't have to argue there. That's a great place to be. So if someone can make it that far in the practice, well, we really shouldn't criticize them too much, because it's it's a good place to be. But the more you go deeper into the process, you realize that as human beings, it's not really our goal to simply be content. It's fine if we reach that stage and if we hang out there for a bit. But in the theory of evolution, there are at least at least that I know of and that I've heard about and seen written, there are at least two other stages of evolution above the human stage. There's the Deva stage or the angelic stage, and there's the sannyasi, the supremely free stage. And so if an individual practices yoga well enough, organizes their life well enough, that things are just going great, and they have this sense of connection with the wholeness of life, that's okay and that's wonderful. We want to get there. But to stop at that point is preventing us from moving on to the next stage. It's as if you're in high school, or actually a better example would be this, because we know a lot of people who do this. It's like if you're in college and you do really well in college and you start to recognize, wow, I really like college a whole lot. So instead of maybe getting your final degree and going out into the world and participate in the world, you think, maybe I could just be a professor. And so you end up just getting one advanced degree after another because you're really comfortable there and you like that space, rather than potentially moving on and becoming more active in the world with what you have learned. That's not the best example. But this is what we do spiritually sometimes. We reach a point where we really like what we have realized. But Mr. Davis would always say, whenever you reach these points, it's okay to enjoy them, but you always have to inquire, well, what's beyond even this? What's beyond even that? In the Yoga Sutras, there are some warnings about this, that you can reach a stage where you are really immersed in what you feel to be a deep sense of oneness. But if you are feeling like you are in a deep sense of oneness, there is still an I there that thinks it's a you. And the I, the sense of separation, is not the end. And so we have to appreciate these subtler states, but we then have to have the strength and the faith to step into that unknown realm, because do we know what it's like to not be an I? Well, not really. I mean, there's a sense of faith. There's a sense of stepping into the abyss in a way by letting go of that I, and that can be a very scary thing. But it is something that in our development as these spiritual beings, we do have to do at some point, and we can't really talk about that because it's the I requires a mind, and we're going to be talking about something that's way beyond the mind. But essentially, to sum it up, we have to keep going, and being content is not the point of our life.
Yeah.
Being content is a foundation for helping us to continue onward. So we do need to cultivate that sense of contentment, that sattvic sense of contentment. But then we have to do that leap of faith to go beyond, and that going beyond is a bit way beyond what we can kind of discuss in a interview today.
Yeah.
But
And
one thing I would, if I could finish up just one more little thing, as you go through the process, you reach that point. So, for example, as you study with someone who's part of the lineage, and you continue with the process and you continue with the study, while no one can really tell you about it, as you continue the process, you will recognize when you reach, oh, here's that point. Ryan was talking about that interview I listened to 10 years ago. And then the lineage itself helps to give you that sense of safety and support to take that step, into the unknown, the next stage.
yeah, and actually to that, I guess, you kind of have people who may, this is, I don't want this to sound contradictory, but, people who may lean too much on lineage,
Mhm.
right? Rather than doing the work. And then on the other hand, there's people who are like, I don't need the lineage. I can just outwork everything. So where's
Yeah.
the balance between that?
Yeah, and that's a good one, because that happens every now and then. You'll get a student, and after 3 or 4 years, like, well, do I really need a teacher? And the teacher who's had a couple decades of experience is thinking, yes, you do, because I remember that experience too when I was younger. The first couple years, since as I mentioned, I did not really have a sense of the guru lineage thing. For many of the first few years, I thought to myself, oh, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. Like, I can handle this on my own.
Yeah.
but but the more that I practiced and the more I just realized how helpful it was to have a guide in that way. So I would say in my own life, I feel that how I have approached it is a bit of that balance because I absolutely love and respect and am so grateful for what uh, my guru has given me. I mean, that relationship has given me everything that I've wanted. And I don't mean fancy things or new mandolins. I mean they've answered my questions and they've given me the deep sense of understanding. That's really what I was wanting. That deep sense of understanding, that deep sense of moving forward on this journey and this path. And I could not have done it without that support. So I have that love and I have that respect and that deep sense of connection. But I do know that if I hadn't done the hard work on my own, it wouldn't have worked. Because I know plenty of people who get involved in a lineage or a tradition and they just think they're going to ride on the coattails of their teacher. Well, their teacher is certainly there. Their teacher is like a really loving, kind, strong parent who wants you to grow up to be a successful adult who can take care of yourself. And if you participate in that way, then you are going to have everything that you need. You're going to get everything you need from that tradition. And then when they pass away, or when you have developed your own inner guidance system, that mutual love and respect will still be there. That connection will still be there. But just like when you have a child who's grown up to be a successful adult, they're not neurotically dependent on their father or mother figure, but they can continue to participate in that relationship. So when you approach it in that way, then it becomes very transformational. And on the other hand, can people do it on their own? Maybe. I haven't met I have not met anyone. I'm just trying to think. I have not met anyone. No, I've not met anyone who has. Um, I've met some very talented people who have put too much emphasis on their talent, and they tried to ride that all the way to the end. And I want to specify that idea there because talented people are great, but there's a book called "Talent is Overrated." And what happens when you're talented is you only reach a certain point because you're used to just being successful. But at some point, that talent has to be channeled into hard work, self scrutiny, self honest, overcoming personal challenges. So talent is not enough in this experience. And when we get people who are very talented, they usually don't make it that far in the long run versus the person who who understands the recipe, does the hard work, has the relationship with supportive role models, gurus, mentors. Those are the people who are going to make the biggest difference in the long run. So it's a really fascinating, question that you asked, and it's a hard one to navigate too because our levels of self awareness are different. Some people might not have much self-awareness at all and they think they can do it all, and they can have the best guru in the world and they're not going to listen to them because their self-awareness isn't quite there yet. and and this is what makes it difficult to navigate this. So we really just have to pray, uh, intend to get the best support that we can have, be surrendered about the process, and be open to not just uh, not just trying to survive on our innate talents, really.
Yeah, and how do we, as practitioners, uh, um, connect with the lineage and honor the lineage?
Mhm. The best way to do that is to um, just very authentically and humbly study the material that the lineage has provided, try to understand it, and do your best to apply what you understand. And then the practices that we've been taught within the lineage, I practice those faithfully. And if we do those things, if we try to apply what we understand, and it might not be perfect. For example, what I thought I understood 20 years ago wasn't anything like what I understood 15 years ago, which was not anything like I understood 10 years ago. So we have to do our best to apply what we understand at our particular level. And if we do it sincerely and with authenticity, then we will see the next step and we will grow closer to our understanding of how to participate with the tradition. But ultimately, it's really about um, just engaging the process as it's been shared, and respecting that as you go. That's all we need to do, really.
Yeah, and here I have this this question I know that Reddit will love. No, no,
Okay.
this idea of the lineages, and um I guess I like people come into this thing where they want to choose their lineage, and there's the different lineages of the Kriya Yoga as an example, or
Mhm.
it's with other traditions as well. And there's all this like, oh, well, this lineage has the true techniques versus and so on. So how do you navigate let's just say even choosing a lineage amidst all of that?
That's a good question, and I only have a speculative answer for that because I don't feel like I chose my lineage. I feel that I just sort of stepped into it and I stuck with it. And even later on, when I learned about other lineages, I wasn't real interested in them. Like I didn't care that someone said they had the right and true way. I knew
Yeah.
what I was doing was right for me, and I had faith and trust because of how I was led by my own teacher. So I think ultimately, for those who are wondering about this, don't get bogged down by the people who say this teacher has the one right true way. Don't worry about that. As I mentioned early on, if someone needs to feel and believe that about their tradition, don't argue with them. Let them believe it because it will help support them in their own path. But what you have to do as an individual is if you are looking around because you don't have an innate sense of this is the way I need to go, um, then what I would say is just pay attention and notice how authentic and sincere the presentations are from the teachers or the lineages that you come across, and also it's very important once you feel a sense of connection or you feel a sense of yes, this seems supportive, this seems sincere, and so on. Well, then try it out and try it out for 6 months to a year. Don't just try it for 2 weeks and see, if you don't have samadhi in 2 weeks, don't give up because that comes way down the line anyway. And I would avoid traditions that say you're going to get samadhi in 2 to 3 weeks or 6 months. That's kind of, it means they're trying to lure you in with something because yoga is hard work. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it says that you experience samadhi after practice over a long period of time, detached practice over a long period of time. So we have to remember that. But then once you try it out, observe, keep a journal and take notes of how have you learned, how have you grown, how have you changed in that 6 months to a year that you've been studying and applying this particular path. And I would also recommend don't try to do 20 paths at once because that will just confuse you. Just like, people who try to date 20 people at one time, it doesn't work. Focus on dating one at a time, and then that's how you will find the one for you. And after that, you just have to keep going and honoring what you know to be beneficial for you, and make sure that again the tradition, the teacher, the teachings, that they are supporting you in your path. That's the best way to approach it.
Yeah, and one final question. This might be a difficult one in the
Okay.
sense of how much experience you had with Roy, who is your teacher. Um, what is something that you learned from your teacher, Roy, um, that has really stuck with you, mm, you know, throughout all this time?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm not sure if it's something I learned as in he taught it to me specifically, but in observing him, what I appreciated and what has really informed my own approach to my practice as well as to teaching is to keep things simple, to not get caught up in drama, and to just stay focused on what you know is supporting you on your spiritual path. One thing that Mr. Davis said, he said the biggest obstacle that people have to their spiritual path is that they don't do what they know they should do. And that can be hard depending on how much psychological stuff you got going on up in your head here, but it's not that hard. If you know that you're supposed that it's helpful for you to meditate every day, if you know it's helpful for you to eat good, clean, healthy food, to not be surrounded by dramatic people, if you know that you have to keep your body strong, if you know that it helps you to be optimistic and to study sacred scriptures, those are very simple things. If you know that that's the case and you don't do them, well, those are the obstacles. And so from him, that's what I picked up on, was that this path is not ridiculously hard. It might take a lot of work and it might take a lot of time, but it's just one foot in front of the other and doing these simple things that contribute to clearer states of consciousness. And so that is one of the biggest aspects of his presence and his teaching and his being that I really feel is important.
For sure. And again, I highly recommend people check out Roy Eugene Davis's his books for sure, and also some of the video lectures that he has available on the internet. Very direct, matter of fact attitude, and yeah, no nonsense. Very, straight. And there's in reading his book, sometimes I have to like something is so simple, like so direct that you have to kind of read it a few times, like just like yeah, it's hard to explain. I mean,
Yeah.
he can say a lot in a very few words.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but thank you so much for coming on again, Ryan. This is a great talk, and I wanted people to have an idea of this idea of continuing the lineage of enlightenment and kind of what it means to do that, and what the lineage is and so on. So thank you for coming on, and I look forward to speaking to you again.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It's always good to see you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Likewise. Take care.